My name is Maya, and last Tuesday I turned 31. I woke up early, before my alarm the way I always do on birthdays, holding on to that old childhood habit of believing the day might feel different from the inside out. It did not. What I found instead, when I reached for my phone and saw the notification, was a wire transfer confirmation for $11,000 sent from my savings account to a mortgage lender I had never heard of. And below it, a text from my mother. "Sweetheart, we knew you would want to help Connor secure his future. He got the house. We are so proud of him. Family makes it happen." I read it 3 times. I set the phone face down on my nightstand. Then I picked it up and read it again. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from. If you have ever been the one your family calls dependable while they celebrate someone else for simply showing up, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what I am about to share is not just my story. It is a pattern I spent 31 years learning to survive and about 48 hours learning to dismantle. Growing up, our family had an unspoken organizational chart. My brother Connor was at the top. I was somewhere in the footnotes. He is 4 years younger than me, which means by the time I was old enough to understand fairness, he had already been established as the one who required more attention, more grace, more celebration. My parents never said it outright. They did not have to. The evidence was everywhere you looked. When I was 9, I won a regional spelling competition. My school held a small assembly. Neither of my parents attended because Connor had a soccer scrimmage that same afternoon and, as my mother explained while braiding my hair that morning, "You understand, honey, he gets so anxious when we are not there in the stands." I nodded. I had already learned that nodding was easier than the alternative. My parents divorced when I was 13. My father moved 40 minutes away, which in the geography of a broken family might as well have been another country. My mother adjusted by leaning harder into Connor's orbit. He was 9 when it happened, young enough that the divorce could be arranged around his emotional needs in ways that mine could not. I was a teenager. Teenagers were supposed to be resilient. Teenagers were supposed to understand. I understood so thoroughly that I stopped mentioning when I did not. By the time I was in high school, I had a part-time job at a pharmacy, maintained a 3.8 GPA, and handled my own school supply lists because my mother had a habit of forgetting that back-to-school season existed until the week before classes. Connor, meanwhile, was being driven to travel baseball tournaments 3 weekends out of 4. My father contributed money for Connor's gear without being asked. When I mentioned once that I needed new cleats for my own school soccer team, my father said, "Girls' sports equipment is so expensive these days, isn't it?" and changed the subject. I earned a partial scholarship to a state university. I worked 2 campus jobs. I graduated with a degree in accounting and a modest amount of debt that I began paying down aggressively the moment I had a steady paycheck. I was 23 when I landed my first real position at a mid-sized firm in the city. I was proud of it. I had built it entirely without a safety net, which in my family was called being independent and treated as though it required no acknowledgement whatsoever. Connor, 4 years behind me, graduated high school with exactly the grades required to graduate. He enrolled in a local college, dropped out after 1 semester, re-enrolled 2 years later, and finally earned an associate's degree at 25. My parents threw him a graduation party with a catered spread and a cake that read, "The sky is the limit." I attended and smiled and helped carry dishes to the sink and did not mention that no one had acknowledged my own graduation with so much as a card. He moved into an apartment with friends at 26. Within 3 months, he had called me twice asking for loans. The first time was $400 for a car repair. I sent it. The second time was $800 for what he described as a temporary cash flow issue. I sent it. He never mentioned repayment, and I never asked, because asking felt like making a scene, and making a scene felt like becoming the difficult one, and I had spent my entire life trying not to become the difficult one. What I did not know at the time was that I had just become the precedent. The third call came 6 months later, not from Connor, but from my mother. She explained that Connor was behind on rent and that eviction would be devastating for his confidence at such a formative stage of his adult life. She used the phrase formative stage without a trace of irony. My brother was 26 years old. I wired $1,200 to his landlord directly because my mother suggested it was safer that way, given Connor's relationship with money. I told myself it was a one-time emergency. I told myself that the next time I would say no. I told myself a lot of things in those years, sitting in my apartment after the transfers went through, eating dinner alone, and checking my budget spreadsheet and assuring myself that I was still on track. Still fine, still able to absorb it. The transfers did not stop. They slowed occasionally, went quiet for a month or two, and then resumed. My mother became the intermediary for most of them. Connor's car insurance lapsed. Connor's phone got shut off. Connor needed the deposit for a new place because he and his roommates had a falling out. There was always a reason, always a version of the story that made refusal feel like cruelty, and I had been trained since childhood to believe that cruelty was the one thing I must never become. Last year, my mother called to tell me that Connor had found the one, a woman named Danny who was, according to my mother, absolutely perfect for him and so grounding. 2 weeks after that, I received a text from Connor himself asking if I could help with closing costs on a house they were looking at. Just a small gap, he said. 15,000, he said, like 15,000 was the kind of number you asked a sibling for over text message. I did not respond immediately. I sat with the text for 3 days. On the 4th day, my mother called and said, "I know Connor reached out. He is trying so hard, Maya. Danny is such a stabilizing influence, and a home would really anchor him. You know how much a stable environment matters for people like Connor." I asked what she meant by people like Connor. She said, "Sensitive people, sweetheart. You have always been so capable of handling things on your own." I recognized the sentence. I had heard it my entire life in slightly different arrangements, always meaning the same thing. You do not need what he needs, therefore you do not get what he gets. I told her I would think about it. 3 weeks later, I transferred $15,000 into the joint account my mother had helpfully provided. I told myself it was a loan. I sent a follow-up text to Connor with that word, loan. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji. My mother sent a string of heart emojis and the words, "You are such a good sister." I did not hear from either of them again until my birthday. Which brings me back to last Tuesday. The $11,000 transfer was not one I had approved. I want to be very clear about that because I have heard the questions people ask. Why did they have access to your account? Why did you leave it open? Why did you let this happen? The answer is layered and ugly and familiar to anyone who grew up in a family where boundaries were treated as acts of aggression. My mother had my banking login from 2 years prior when I had been hospitalized briefly with appendicitis and needed her to pay a bill on my behalf. I had never changed the password. I had never changed it because changing it would have felt like an accusation. Because in my family, protecting yourself was always framed as an attack on someone else. They had used my account, without asking, without telling me, to cover the remaining gap on Connor's mortgage closing. $11,000. On my birthday. And the announcement had come via text message, phrased as a gift I had given, described as a decision I had made, as though my own money had been borrowed from a version of me that everyone else got to speak for. I sat in my apartment for a long time that morning. I did not cry. I had the strange, cold feeling of a long-running calculation finally arriving at its answer. This was not an accident. This was not thoughtlessness. People do not accidentally log into a bank account, navigate to the transfer screen, enter a routing number, and confirm. This was a decision someone made, and the decision was that my money, my labor, my savings were communal property when Connor needed them, and invisible the rest of the time. I opened a spreadsheet. I had kept records, not originally for any strategic purpose, just because I am an accountant and keeping records is the way I think. Every transfer, every loan, every contribution that had been framed as love and accepted as obligation. The car repair. The 800. The months of rent supplements I had provided after the landlord situation. The deposit for the new apartment. The closing cost loan, and now 11,000 more, taken without my knowledge. The total was $23,460. Over 3.5 years. Money that could have been the beginning of my own down payment. Money that had instead become the infrastructure of my brother's adult life. The life my family celebrated, toasted, captioned with pride, while my actual birthday passed in silence. I looked at the number for a long time. Then I called my bank. The fraud department was helpful. The situation was complicated because I had voluntarily shared my credentials, which made it a civil matter rather than a criminal one. But they flagged the account, revoked third-party access, and changed my login credentials while I was on the phone. The woman I spoke with was professional and kind. She did not ask why I had shared my login with family. I appreciated that. I spent the rest of my birthday at my desk, not working, composing 3 separate messages in my head and discarding all of them. The angry version felt like it would only give my mother something to defend against. The hurt version felt like handing her a weapon. I wanted something that could not be argued with. I wanted facts. I built a document. Bank statements, transfer records, screenshots, the text from Connor asking for the initial 15,000. My mother's reply with the heart emojis. The birthday morning text announcing the unauthorized transfer as though it were a gift I had chosen to give. 47 pages total, organized by date, annotated with running totals. I emailed it to both my parents and to Connor with a subject line that read, "A full accounting." The message was 3 sentences. I have compiled a complete record of all financial transfers I have made to or on behalf of Connor over the past 3.5 years, totaling $23,460. This includes the $11,000 withdrawn from my account yesterday without my knowledge or consent. All access to my banking information has been revoked. I will not be making further contributions. I hit send. I ordered Thai food. I turned my phone face down and watched a movie I'd been putting off for months. I slept easily, which surprised me. The following morning I turned my phone back on at 7. There were 42 notifications. My mother had called 11 times. My father, who lives across town and keeps his distance from most things, had called twice, which meant my mother had already recruited him. Connor had sent 14 text messages progressing from confusion to anger to a single all-caps line that read, "This is Ina saying you are ruining my life." Danny, whom I had met exactly once at a family dinner, had somehow acquired my number and sent a message asking me to please reconsider before this destroys everything Connor has worked for. I noted, without particular surprise, that no one had wished me a happy birthday. I went to work. I processed quarterly reports. I ate lunch at my desk. I did not check my personal phone until 5 o'clock. By then, my mother had escalated to email. The subject line was, "We need to talk immediately." The body was 3 paragraphs explaining that what had happened was a miscommunication. That she had been certain I would have approved if asked. That Connor's future was at a critical juncture. And that my reaction was disproportionate and hurtful to the whole family. The final paragraph contained a sentence I read several times. "You have always had so much more than Connor in terms of stability and discipline. It is not fair to punish him for the gifts you were given." The gifts I was given. I thought about the spelling competition. I thought about the cleats. I thought about the catered graduation party with the cake. I thought about $23,000 leaving my account in increments over 3.5 years, framed always as help. Never as debt, never as sacrifice. Never as something that cost me anything because the working assumption had always been that my resources were renewable and Connor's needs were not. I wrote back to my mother. The money was not a miscommunication. Accessing someone's financial accounts without their knowledge is not a miscommunication. I am not going to discuss this further until you acknowledge what actually happened. She did not acknowledge what actually happened. She sent a follow-up email calling me laser-focused on winning an argument instead of protecting your family. My father sent a message that was softer in tone and more insidious in content. "Maya, I understand you're upset, but Connor and Danny have already moved forward with the closing based on what they believed was a confirmed contribution. Pulling back now has real consequences for them." As though the real consequences for me were not already 47 pages long. On day 3, my aunt called my office line. I have 4 aunts on my mother's side. This was Aunt Patricia, who once drove 6 hours to attend Connor's high school graduation and sent me a $40 gift card for mine. She wanted me to know that the family was very concerned about the rift I was creating and that Connor and Danny are just starting out. And starting out is hard. I thanked her for calling and returned to my work. On day 5, Connor showed up at my apartment building. He did not ring my unit. He waited in the lobby and asked my neighbor, a woman I'd exchanged exactly 12 sentences with in 2 years, to let him up. She did, because he looks harmless and apparently told her it was urgent. He knocked on my door for 4 minutes. I know because I stood in my hallway and watched the clock on my phone. When he stopped, he slid a handwritten note under the door that said, "Danny is having anxiety attacks. The mortgage company is asking questions. You are doing this on purpose because you want me to fail." I kept the note. I added it to the document. What nobody in my family seemed to understand, or perhaps what they understood and were counting on me not to act on, was that I had changed my own calculation. Not out of anger, though the anger was real. Not out of revenge, though I will not pretend the idea of consequences landing somewhere other than on me was entirely without satisfaction. I had changed the calculation because I had finally, at 31, sat down and looked at the full picture. And the full picture showed me something I had been refusing to see for a long time. I was not helping Connor build a life. I was building it for him, plank by plank, while my own blueprints sat in a drawer. My father called on day 7. Not through my mother this time. Directly. From his personal cell, at 8 in the evening. I answered because I was curious. He said, "I saw the document you sent. I waited." He said, "I did not realize it had gotten to this amount." I said, "No one did." That was how it worked. There was a long silence. My father is not a man who handles silence badly. He sat in it for a moment and then said, "I have been watching your mother manage Connor your entire life, and I stepped back from it because I did not want the conflict. I think I told myself you were handling it fine because you never said you weren't." Another pause. "That was not fair to you." I did not have a prepared response for that. I had prepared responses for accusations and deflections and emotional escalations. I had not prepared one for a quiet admission in the dark. I said, "No, it was not." He asked if we could have lunch. Not to negotiate, he said, not to convince me of anything. Just lunch. I told him I would think about it. I meant it. On day 9, Danny sent a second message, this one longer and less measured than the first. She told me that Connor's mental health was suffering, that the stress of the situation was affecting their relationship, and that I needed to understand that some people are not wired for the kind of resilience you have. She seemed to mean this as a compliment. I found it clarifying. It was, almost word for word, the explanation my mother had been offering my entire life. You are capable. He is not. Therefore you absorb the cost. It had moved from mother to girlfriend with remarkable efficiency, as though the role required a certain script and the person filling it had simply learned their lines. I replied to Danny once. I said, "I hope Connor finds a sustainable path forward." That's genuinely not sarcasm, but I'm not able to be that path anymore. She did not respond. On day 11, my mother arrived at my office. I found out because the receptionist called my extension and said, quietly and with professional sympathy, "Maya, there is a woman at the front desk who says she is your mother. She seems upset. Should I call security or pie?" I told him I would handle it. In the lobby, my mother was standing with her coat buttoned wrong, which she never does. She is meticulous about her appearance in a way that has always made me understand that she knows exactly how she presents to the world. The wrong buttons told me she had left the house quickly, driven here without thinking it through, which meant she was operating on something closer to desperation than strategy. I led her outside. She began speaking before the door had fully closed behind us. "This is enough, Maya. You have made your point. Connor and Danny are terrified. They could lose the house. They could lose the deposit. You are doing this to punish him." I said, "Mom, I am at work. I do not care. My son is in crisis and you are the only one who can help him, and you are choosing not to. He is 27 years old. He needs support. I have provided $23,000 of support. He used it and did not acknowledge it, and then your family used my account without asking and sent me a text to tell me about it on my birthday." I kept my voice level. Around us, people walked past on the sidewalk, indifferent. "My birthday, Mom. You did not call me. You did not text me until 10 in the morning to tell me you had taken money from my account." She looked, briefly, like she might say something real. Then the look closed. "I thought you would be happy to help him. You did not ask." I assumed. You assumed because you have always assumed, I said. Because my money and my time and my energy have been assumed to be available for this family since I was old enough to earn them. And I am done with the assumption. She stood very still. A colleague I recognized walked out of the building behind me, caught my eye, continued walking with the discreet professionalism of someone deciding very quickly not to be involved. If you walk away from your brother now, my mother said, you will not be welcome at family events. I am serious about this, Maya. I had thought about this moment. Not specifically, not as a mapped-out conversation, but I had thought about what it would feel like when the thing I had been afraid of my whole life was finally said out loud. What I had been afraid of was being excluded. What I discovered, standing on the sidewalk outside my office building at 11:45 on a Tuesday, was that exclusion felt almost indistinguishable from my ordinary life. I had been uninvited from the party long before anyone said so. They had simply kept me on the guest list long enough to cover the costs. Okay, I said. She blinked. Okay. 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 I understand. I'm going back inside now. I pulled open the door. You should get your coat buttons fixed. Second one from the top is off. I went back to work. My hands were shaking for about 20 minutes. Then they stopped. That evening, I called my college roommate, a woman named Jess who has known me since I was 19 and who said, when I told her the full story from beginning to end, Maya, I've been watching you disappear into your family for a decade, and I did not know how to say it without making you feel worse. I told her I wished she had said it anyway. She said she was sorry she hadn't. We talked for 2 hours. I slept better than I had in weeks. 2 months later, I signed a lease on a new apartment. Bigger than my old one, in a neighborhood I had been watching for 3 years but had always told myself I could not yet afford. The math worked now. It worked because I had looked at what I had been spending on Connor's life and pointed it at my own. I had not spoken to my mother since the sidewalk. We exchanged a single brief email when my grandmother asked us both to attend her 80th birthday dinner. I went. My mother was there. Connor and Danny were there. We passed dishes across the table and made conversation about the food and the weather. It was uncomfortable, and it was manageable, and it was, I realized, roughly the relationship we had always had, stripped of the financial obligation that had been mistaken for closeness. My father and I had lunch, twice, now. The first time was awkward and honest and ended with him saying he had not understood for most of my life that capable was not the same as not needing anything. The second time was easier. We are figuring out what a real relationship looks like, slowly, without the architecture of old roles to fall back on. I do not know how far it will go. But the foundation is different this time. Connor texted me 6 weeks after the closing. He and Danny had found a way to manage the gap through a combination of a short-term loan and money from Danny's parents, who, I gathered, had expressed considerable displeasure about the situation. The text did not include an apology. It said, I guess things worked out. I hope you're good. I sat with the message for a day. I wrote back, I'm glad it worked out. I hope things are stable for you both. I meant it, in the way that I can mean something and also know it required me to stop being the reason it was true. The part of this that nobody tells you, the part that I could not have predicted when I was standing in my hallway watching my brother knock on my door, is that the hardest thing is not the confrontation. The confrontation, when it finally came, felt almost like relief. Like a window opened in a room that had been sealed too long. The hardest thing is the grief that follows. Not grief for the money, though $23,000 is $23,000. Grief for the family you thought you had. The version where the imbalance was temporary, where recognition was coming, where the next holiday would be the one where someone looked at you across the table and said, we see you. Letting go of that version is the actual work. The emails and the spreadsheets and the revoked bank access are just the surface of it. I turned 31 alone in my apartment with Thai food and a movie, and I thought about the 32 I was already planning differently. A trip I had been postponing for 6 years because there was always something more urgent claiming my savings. Friends I had been meaning to make more time for. A therapist I had found in the fall whose approach made me feel for the first time that being capable did not preclude being cared for. The snow came early this year. My new apartment has a window that faces east, and in the mornings when the light comes through it, The city looks different from every angle I have tried before. I am learning what it feels like to live in a space that was sized for my actual life, rather than the leftover space around someone else's. My brother has a house. I helped build it, all those years, more than I should have, in ways I did not fully understand until I added it up. That is a true thing. Another true thing is that I have my savings back, my boundaries back, and a birthday coming that I am already planning to celebrate, not because someone else remembered, but because I finally remembered for myself. If any part of this story felt familiar, I would genuinely love to hear from you in the comments. If you have ever been the capable one, the responsible one, the one your family borrowed from without ever offering back, tell me about it. You are not alone in it, and you are not obligated to stay in it. Please subscribe if this is the kind of story you want more of, and hit the like button if you have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself. Thank you for being here. Your story is worth telling, even if the people closest to you spent years trying to convince you otherwise.